Sige po. So now we are currently recording. So with your permission, Sir Joff and Marge, pwede na ba ako, can we start or is it okay to
Sige,
begin?
Yes po, Father.
sige po, para.
Thank you po.
Okay.
Good morning po again to everyone. Welcome to this session. Basically, this
Morning,
is
Father.
morning po. Basically, this is the second session that I have had with SBG. Previously, I was able to, the administrators of SBG and I were able to basically have an orientation in terms of the courseware development project. No? At this point po, I'd like to hopefully our administrators have been able to brief you about what it is about. But maybe I will be tackling parts of it in today's session. So what I'll try to do in this session is basically to introduce where we are coming from. Just because every courseware development process always has to review basically parang the impetus and basically the driving force behind what we will be creating. So maybe some of the points here that I will be talking about will be more of a repetition or a repetition for everyone. But I'd like to ask for your patience so that we could just clarify expectations at this level, because this project will seem very daunting for many of us. But as we go along, parang, and if we're clear about where we're coming from, I think that will always orient us in the right direction. So just to establish po certain context, right now, other schools in the university have already commenced their courseware development project. So in particular, the School of Arts and Sciences have already begun their courseware development project. Right now, they're expected to produce 17 courses, and these are basically all of them would be GE and core courses, since that is what we're prioritizing in terms of courseware development. So sa SBG po, you gave me 12 professional courses, and you will be commencing by the second semester. So hopefully what we'll talk about today will give us a framework in terms of how we're supposed to be designing our courses, so that it would be suited and adaptable to online learning. This will be one of hopefully several other sessions, because in SAS, for example, we have had already 6 sessions just talking about courseware development. And in the School of Nursing, we have had tatlo, and we'll be doing our 4th one next week. And then with the School of Education, we already had 2 sessions already. So sa SEA, supposedly we were supposed to commence today, but they moved it to next week. Okay, so yun po, parang hopefully, as I said, parang this will be establish the grounding for what we will be doing. And if you have questions, but just feel free to use the chat box for questions. If I am not able to address it or read it immediately, but we'll try to address the questions that you have. So just use the chat box, or if not later, parang at the end of this presentation, if you can voice out your questions or concerns, we would very much appreciate it, so that we could resolve siguro some unclear points, or maybe if we have suggestions to make, then those are very much welcome. So to start off, let me just, please don't get surprised if my face suddenly shows up in your screen, parang big time. Okay, I will just move back, baka magulat kayo sa ano. Basically because the screen that I will be using this screen to present my slides as well. Okay. So Basically, the title of this presentation is the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm as Instructional Design for Online Education. But that's not the complete title. I've inserted there something which perhaps you will see better if I show it full screen. Okay. So the IPP as more than just instructional design for online education. I think at the heart of every courseware development process is instructional design, because what we are doing when we're creating courseware is first making sure that our framework in terms of constructing a learning environment is clear to the designers of the course, because it will affect all the other facets or aspects of an online course. Yes, the technology is very important, but in the literature on online education, basically many authors are saying that um, in terms of online education, it is pedagogy that should be shaping the technology and not the other way around. And that's why we're starting with this session, because following what the experts are saying about online education, we would like to clarify first what the pedagogy is that underpins our courseware development process. So to start off, I just you've been hearing about courseware, but for many of us who have been in the initial orientation with the administrators, courseware really is software that contains the instructional strategies, the materials, and the instruction itself. Um, so it's basically everything that we have when we used to when we were teaching offline, and we integrate that with the software that is available so that we could deliver this content in this environment. Hopefully, these terms will be clarified more as we move along. So the first thing I think that I have to say is that we begin first once again with Jesuit education, because one of the questions that we are facing in this current setup is, um, does Jesuit education still make sense in an online environment? Or can we still provide Jesuit education even in this online education? Um, so to begin with, I think Jesuit education has a distinctive spirit. And I think this is the stamp, this is the brand that we would like to put into the kind of teaching, into the kind of courses that we are offering in this online environment. But what is distinctive about Jesuit education? What makes this education specifically Jesuit? Um, the grounding, this distinctive spirit really emanates from the experience first of the founder of the Jesuits, Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And in his writings, in the society that he founded, and extending as well to this apostolate, to this educational ministry of which you and I are all part of. Um, so, in other words, when we're talking about Jesuit education, it's not just an educational theory, it's not just an educational construct. It has in its core a spiritual basis. And it is this spiritual foundation that animates, or that ought to animate, the kind of education that we provide to our students. Now, we're not saying that we should be, parang converting all our courses into spiritual courses. But what we're saying is that in the very way we teach, in the kind of persons or teachers that we are when we're teaching, all of this ought to be shaped by this Jesuit inspiration, no? Which is really the inspiration that we take from Saint Ignatius of Loyola. But what is this distinctive spirit? No? Um, this distinctive spirit is communicated through the pedagogy that we adopt. No? By pedagogy, typically it's defined as the art and science of teaching. But the way Jesuits see it is that it's not just, once again, parang an educational theory. No? It's not just reduced to the methods or the methodology that we imply in our that we employ in order to teach our learners. Rather, when we think of pedagogy, we are saying that it goes beyond just the teaching itself, but it's about adopting a certain worldview, a certain perspective, not only about the human person, but also about the world. So in a sense, when we're talking about pedagogy, we're really talking about first an anthropology of the person. Who is the person that we are educating? And what is the world? What is the relationship of this person vis-a-vis the world, vis-a-vis other people, and vis-a-vis God? No? So this is what we mean here when we're talking about pedagogy. That's why in our Jesuit education, we need to go back to return to, in sense, to this inspiration, because what we hope is that this inspiration will find itself in the various disciplines that we are offering in the university. So what is it really all about? No? What is our goal in a sense when we're engaging in education? No? We're not here for the profit. No? We're not here for anything else except this purpose. And the purpose here is to help encourage the full growth of the human person. And in growing, hopefully that this person will take action, will do something concrete for the world and for other peoples. And in this action, that he is always grounded and informed by his own faith. So this is basically what we're here for. And I think we're very grateful in a sense that what you are doing in this university is helping us move towards this goal. No? So it might seem like a very lofty and ambitious goal, but really this is what it is all about in this Jesuit university. And all the other things, if you take note, if you look at this definition, no, this goal of action based on sound understanding and enlivened by contemplation urges students to self-discipline and initiative, to integrity and accuracy. Um, if you notice, many of the what Jesuit education urges students to do are some of the issues really that we find when we're in online education. No? Issues in terms of whether students will accomplish the tasks that we have given them. No, issues of whether they will not cheat, for example, in the assessments that are being provided in online education, no? And so on and so forth. In fact, from this perspective, we can see that all these issues that we're encountering is really part of what we're trying to form, what we're trying to correct in our students as well. No? So that in developing the persons and the learners and the students that are entrusted to our care, no, that they will be, in a sense, a force of good in the world. No? Um, and by that we mean, to be a force of good, we have to develop them into the kind of person who can really be agents of that change that we are looking for in society. So I think many of us already have that at the back of our minds when we're teaching. Now, the question here is, how does this pedagogy relate to instructional design? I think first we need to define what instructional design means. There are actually many definitions in the literature for instructional design. But one of the more popular definitions is the one that is on the upper left-hand corner. And this is a definition uh, which I also like now, because it's very simple and it really captures what instructional design is. So it's really the art and science of creating an instructional environment where we bring our learners from a state where they're not able to accomplish a task to a state where they are now able to accomplish those tasks. Notice that the focus really, in a sense, from a certain perspective na parang it sounds very task oriented, no? But sometimes learning could be construed in that way, no? To teach someone to do something, no? Instructional design is really creating that environment for a person to be able to do that thing. So it's really very simple. Despite the rather intimidating terminology, but instructional design is really just that. No? Now, there are many models of instructional design, and sometimes this has been a thorny issue among educators. No? What instructional design do we actually adopt? What instructional design seems most suited for our purposes? Now, in online courseware development, um, there are many instructional designs that you can pick from. In fact, as I covered the literature on it, these are just 12 out of many others. In fact, I lost track of the number. But this is just one category in terms of the kinds of instructional models that are available. So I'll just briefly flash it in your screen. So you have here the classic Gagne-Briggs model, which is, kumbaga, the godfather of all instructional designs, because basically Gagne and Briggs was the first one who articulated what ID was all about. Okay, here's another one, and then another one. This is the third one, and then the fourth one, the fifth one, sixth, seventh, eighth, 9, 10, 11. Notice this is the very popular ADDIE model, which means analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. Okay, and many instructional designs right now are actually trace their origin to the ADDIE model. And then here's another one, the 4CID model. Now, as you can see, you can spend siguro a lot of time just trying to figure out which instructional design to use for our purposes, no? But according to the author Seal et al, no, all of these things, if you put them together, they really he came up with components of instructional design. And he says that at least when we're talking about instructional design, these are the things that you'd find. No? Notice how all the components are strangely remind us of this ADDIE model. No? So there's a part where you're talking about context, the design and development of learning environments, the implementation of this design, and eventually the evaluation of this design. So in a sense, it's a very structured way of looking at how we could produce an instructional environment. No? But if we step back and look at it with the lens as well of the IPP, I think we could find certain resonances with many of the components of instructional design. No? When we're taking a look at the analysis part, this is really something that resonates with the context part of the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. When we're talking about the design and development, it talks about the evaluation, the experience, the reflection and action part of this of the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. The implementation is mostly more precisely the action part, and then of course you have the evaluation part as well. No? So in a sense, parang there's a certain similarity. In fact, it's very much similar to the IPP. But what I'd like to say here is that if you take a look at instructional design as it is defined and the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, I think there is a difference. No? Because the IPP, as I've said earlier, is not just an instructional design, but it goes beyond instructional design, because instead of focusing on just an instructional environment that teaches a learner how to do something, the IPP has a more ambitious goal in a sense, because its goal is to take the learner, the student, where he is or she is, and to transform the learner into a kind of person who is also flourishing in his own personhood, and a person who is able to act for his community and do something for his community, as well as a person who is, once again, rooted in his very faith. So that, looking at this literature and comparing it to our Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, the main takeaway really here is that, if you can read from the slides, no, that it's, as I mentioned, it's more than just an instructional design. And I think this is where and how we approach the challenge of developing courseware. Because as I said, our focus is not just to teach the task, but our focus is still formation. That's why the difference of the IPP from any instructional design is that the IPP's interest is the formation of the whole person. And I think this is a hallmark of our own Jesuit education. We just don't want people who are very technically competent, but we want people who are, in a sense, people who will be truly alive, no? People who could make the most of what they have so that they could be of service to others. And that's very challenging, especially when we're thinking of creating an environment that tries to engage the total person. No? But I'm sure in our experiences, especially for many of us who have been teaching in a Jesuit university for a long time, there's already, no, and perhaps para more than anybody else, but there's already this affinity, in a sense, with the goals of Jesuit education. No? So parang I think parang listening to this and looking back at our own teaching experiences, I think we can already find certain resonances. No? The mere fact that our students are not just treated as automatons, no? But they're treated as persons, I think that's already something that makes our teaching very different here. No? So in a sense, where we're coming from in terms of how we're designing our courses is the IPP. No? It's not any other instructional model. Sure, we are adapting facets of the other instructional models, but really the core of it is the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. No? So hearing this, I think parang many of us would think that then practically there's really nothing different in terms of how we are supposed to carry out this development of our courses in an online environment. No? That's true. There's really nothing different in terms of the spirit that should be animating it. The only difference now is that in the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, the context part means that we might need to reevaluate how we're doing things so that we could be more effective even in an online environment. But it's the same spirit, it's the same principles that inform how we are supposed to be designing our courses, how we're supposed to be teaching them to our students. Having said that, I think we have to go now to defining what we mean by online education. First off, the literature in online education is quite diverse. No? In fact, there are so many interchangeable terms. No? Sometimes they're talking about online learning. Sometimes they're talking about online teaching. Sometimes they're talking about online education. But they're practically talking about the same thing. That's why in one article where the authors tried to collate all the definitions of online pertaining to online education, they said that there are certain common themes that emerge in these definitions. One of which is the synonymous use of the terms and how these concepts tend to overlap with each other. Another crucial element in online education is the time element. So therefore, there's always that uh, point where we're considering the time element in terms of synchronicity and asynchronicity. So whether we're teaching real time or we're teaching, in a sense, asynchronously, meaning that the student is able to pace himself uh, and basically decide how he is going to learn, considering his own pace. So, but all these things are still part of online education. But the primary difference, I think, is that in this education, we are very dependent on the technology that we are using in order to do the things that we used to do when we were in a face-to-face setup. There are other common themes in terms of the definitions. First is the importance that is being ascribed to interactivity. That's why online learning always makes use of interactive content. In other words, students are able to do many things online. They interact with the video. They are able to interact with their fellow students. Are able to interact also with their professor. So it harnesses even the capacity of technology to provide that interaction, despite the fact that actual physical interaction is not possible in this platform. The other important thing is the recognition of physical distance as a factor that complicates teaching online. We often can overlook this because, for example, because of this technology, it seems to break the barrier of distance, because it's as if I'm just here, talking to you, and you're just here right in front of me, and we're just having this dialogue in the same place. But what is being recognized in the definition is that this physical distance is a very important factor. Because unlike in a face-to-face setup where you can be aware of micro interactions that are happening, non-verbal gestures, etc., etc. In an online education setup, parang you have no control in terms of where students will be listening, where students will be, what they're doing, the environment that they're actually in while they're attending classes online. And sometimes I think the implication of that is, it's difficult to really apply what the rules that we used to have when we were doing face-to-face teaching, because this physical distance basically, in a sense, uh, breaks down parang all the other things that used to be applicable when we were still in a very enclosed physical location. And so these are some of the things that emerge in terms of online education. But as definitions, okay, I have here two definitions of online learning. As I said, parang these are synonymous terms as it is being used in the literature. But I've highlighted certain phrases just to show you that this, there's no, in a sense, firm definition of what online learning should be like. So the first one emphasizes the synchronous classroom. Both are talking about that use of technology, internet, online computers, or through the internet. But here, the time element can be different. It could be a synchronous environment or an asynchronous environment. Other common themes that emerge is this: online education is not dependent on the physical location. In other words, you don't have to be here in order for online education to happen. You could be in your bedroom, you could be at the beach, you could be anywhere in the world and still be able to engage in online learning. The other important element here, it seems, is that the time element, as you can see here in the second definition, where online learning can happen at the time of their convenience. So sometimes I think part of the tension that we're experiencing right now is that we're trying to adapt the structures of face-to-face learning to an online environment which does not really, in a sense, which is very different from the traditional face-to-face environment that we have. So that I think in the design of our course, what we are really moving towards is a revolution in terms of parang how we can imagine time in a classroom setting. No? Ngayon, we're assigning people to certain set times na dapat dito you'll be present on this on your schedule. No? But in online education, that's not really the case. In other words, time is something that the learner has to be responsible for. But what teachers can offer is to provide the learners a sense of how much time he or she would need in order to accomplish, for example, the lessons or to finish the entire course. No? So again, parang that's already a radically different way of looking at online education. Dati, we sort of prescribed that dapat at a certain point, you should be in classes, etc., etc., at these set times. But in an online educational setup, you just give people parang the number of hours that they need in order to accomplish something. So if they're able to finish it ahead of time, good, no? If they're not able to finish it, they can, parang keep on pursuing that until the time that they complete the required number of hours to finish it, no? So I think parang this is something that we have to bear in mind as well, because many of the confusion and the misunderstandings that emerge in online education happens because our structures are still locked into the traditional face-to-face structures, which is really incompatible with the online educational environment. Okay. Now, despite the diversity of definitions, the authors of this paper propose a definition for online education, which tries to incorporate all the elements. And I think this is where where I'm introducing this definition so that we could be on the same page in terms of what we mean when we're talking about online education. So from the definition, you could read there that it is education that is being delivered in an online environment, and therefore parang this medium always has to be taken into consideration. Okay, and this environment is accessible only through the use of the internet. Okay, and that's why parang connectivity is always a big issue, and that's why we always have to take into account that learning will not be possible unless students have access to the technology, unless students are able to enter into this online environment as well. So features of this online education include learning that is not dependent on their physical or virtual co-location. Okay. And the other one is that the content could either be delivered or is always delivered online, and that the modules are interactive and designed either for asynchronous or an asynchronous environment. Now, what are the advantages if we go by a synchronous environment or if we go by an asynchronous environment? Now, much of it depends on the state of our learners. If you're teaching in the grade school, I think a synchronous classroom would be more applicable because you would have to guide students along the way, and they're very dependent, in other words, in terms of how the teacher is going to lead them through a lesson. But if you look at, for example, more adult learners, no, and I think probably at this point, parang the culture of learning has not reached that point wherein our own adult learners in the higher education are, in a sense, capable of independent learning. No? But part of being able to learn independently is really providing conditions so that learners can learn independently. That's why an asynchronous environment is where we already gave the materials beforehand. There's a part where they can just tune into the lectures at any time that they want. No? So everything has been packaged, in other words, so that students can take more responsibility for their learning. Now the question, does this mean that where we are right now, that we should do away with all synchronous learning? Now, at this point, I think, as I said, parang I don't think our learners are completely ready for a totally asynchronous environment. No? But then again, I think we can slowly design our courses in such a way that we could empower them to become more self-paced and independent learners. By independent, we mean, you don't just leave them to their own devices, but by independent, we mean we are providing them with the resources and the instruction so that they can access it in order to help teach themselves in the process. Now, probably parang part of courseware development is finding siguro that balance depending on the conventions of our discipline in terms of whether having more time for synchronous sessions would help or whether having more time for asynchronous sessions would help. Of course, in terms of practicality, having teaching in a constantly synchronous environment is going to be tiring. Something like this, no? Parang what I'm doing right now, which is what many of us are also doing when we're conducting lectures, parang it's not the same energy as when you are in a classroom, no? An hour here feels like an eternity if you're a teacher, no? Parang because it's as if you're just doing a monologue when you're teaching online. And part of it is that you will be tied up to set times when you're trying to teach synchronously, no? In other words, the promises of online education to free teachers for more for other things like research, or parang you'd have more time to attend to students on a more personal basis, will not be possible if our courses are heavily synchronous. In other words, what we will be doing is just transposing what we have been doing face to face and just doing that in an online environment. Now, that is going to be tiring. That is going to be very stressful. But in an asynchronous environment, the difficult part is just in preparing and creating the content. But once it's there, okay, you can take a step back and do other things and just devote a certain time to checking assessments or responding to questions from students, or perhaps at some point intervening so that you could explain it further if needed. No? And then after that, you can just refresh the entire course again, and then you don't have to do anything else. It's the same thing that keeps on iterating itself. So in the long run, this courseware development project really promises to make it easier for teachers, who are teaching online, and as well as promising uh, it promises that the student will have a more pleasant online learning experience, no? A less taxing and a less stressful online learning environment. So this is actually what we're doing. We're trying to find ways to make it easy for everyone so that you will have more time. No? You will not be spending all your time in front of the computer throughout the entire day, which is what's happening to me, and which is what's happening perhaps to many of us who are handling so many subjects. No? With this, no, parang you can just let it run. Students can access it, and you could be doing something else, no? And you can just say, well, in a day, parang I'll just devote 3 hours of instructional time to check the papers, to check whether they've answered, to respond to emails, and so on and so forth. No? So after that, you have the rest of the time for yourself. This is what courseware development promises to do. So going back to our IPP as the framework that informs our design of the courses, its inspiration is really taken from the spiritual exercises. and it imagines that relationship that is happening in the spiritual exercises as the template for the relationship that happens in a learning environment. So the Ignatian paradigm is really this: the retreatant working with the director, no? Or the director working with the retreatant. um, what happens here is that the director provides an environment, suggests material for the retreatant to be able to be familiar with the ways that God is moving in his or her life. The assumption here is that God always deals with each person individually. And to be able to see how that movement happens, the retreatant has to be prepared, has to be helped so that he'll be able to see how God is moving in his or her own life. And that is where the role of the director comes in. No? He teaches or creates this condition for the retreatant to become aware of that divine movement in his life. Now, in order to be able to teach the retreatant that, the director also has to be familiar with the ways of God. And therefore, it also presupposes that the director is already aware and familiar as well with the way God works in his or her own life. So that um, with this experiential knowledge, he is able to guide the retreatant in his own or her own journey towards God. This is the Ignatian paradigm, which is the inspiration for the relationship that happens in the IPP. Now, in the IPP, this is what happens. No? If we were to convert that Ignatian paradigm to the teacher-learner relationship, if we replace those terms, we replace retreatant with the learner, we replace the rector with the teacher, we replace the God with truth. This is what happens in an educational environment. The teacher, functioning like a director, creates the environment, provides the material, guides the learner so that he can pursue and appreciate the truth. No? So, but it also presupposes that the teacher also knows how to approach the truth and is now giving the learner the opportunity to discover that for himself or herself. Uh, so as you can see, again, the instructional design, the relationship in terms of teacher-learner and the subject matter that is to be learned has its spiritual basis as well in the Ignatian paradigm. And this is what happens every time we're teaching in a Jesuit university. This is the dynamics that happens in that teaching process. So much so, if you put it side by side, no? Uh, that's why I'm saying that in as much as it has its spiritual inspiration, its application may not exactly look very spiritual, but it mirrors that movement as well. Because I think one of the beliefs that we have here, no, as Jesuits, is that if a person is taught how to appreciate and pursue the truth, he will always find himself back to God as well. No? So yun yung underlying assumption dito in why the Jesuits have formulated this pedagogy. Because through education, a person could be formed in such a way that he will always find himself on his way back to this creator. So where does the IPP come in here? From that inspiration, the Ignatian paradigm and the learner-teacher relationship that happens in an educational setting, this is where the IPP comes in. No, I will just briefly run through it because maybe we have already, in a sense, heard it from uh, um, uh, talks that have been made before. But the first principle here is context. This is really, as you see here from the documents of the characteristics of Jesuit education. No? When they produce that document, they basically identify these 5 principles. context, experience, reflection, action, evaluation. By context, we're saying this is the starting point, which is the hallmark of Jesuit education. And what is that starting point? Typically, when teachers are teaching, your first question is, what do I need to teach? No? Or how should I be, no, what is the content that I need to teach my students? No? But in Jesuit education, it's the other way around. No? The first question here is really, who are the students that I will be teaching? No? And the question is posed because this is where the personal care and concern for the students come in. This is where cura personalis, which is a hallmark of Jesuit education, begins. It starts from the very point before we even design our courses. We are already thinking of the welfare of our students. No? So in our instructional design, parang this is, kumbaga, if others see it very technically as just analysis, no, or needs analysis, what we're saying here is that, can we imagine the situation of our students right now? If they're going to take this online course, how would they be learning? How would they be feeling as they're taking this particular course? No? What will work best for them? I think for many of us, we already have this sense, no? But here in the IPP, it's been explicitly articulated as the starting point every time we're thinking about pedagogy. No? And that's why it's there. And in planning our courses, we're asking our faculty, no? We're asking you, and we're asking our colleagues to begin with the question of, where are our students coming from? No? Where are they at this point? No? What would help them at this point in the pandemic? No? The second point is, in the consideration of their context, then we can begin creating a learning experience for them. And this experience is not just a matter of us feeding content, but experience as conceived in the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm is really about creating an experience so that students can learn how to learn. That's the first point, to learn how to learn. And the second point is that this experience should engage the whole person of the student. No? Ignatius very well recognized that for a person to learn something, it's not enough that it's only in the mind. It has to be the kind of learning that becomes internalized, no? That engages a person not just cognitively, but also emotionally or affectively. No? So that, yun nga, parang, di ba, when we, in the lessons that we create, no? For, sometimes students do not just say, I like it because it's very clear, no? But the best compliment that you will get, even when you're teaching a very technical, subject, such as some of the courses that you're teaching in SBG, is when students say, I love this subject, no? When they're saying they're doing that, it's because you were able to engage them as total persons. So much so na they're saying, I loved it. Kahit na mga numbers yan, no? Parang, I love it, no? Kahit na anong formula yung binigay mo, pero for students to say that I love your subject, ma, ibig sabihin you were doing something that engaged them as persons. And I think the challenge here is, how do we create the modules in our courseware? How do we create our courseware so that they will say, I still love this subject despite the fact that it's online it's in an online environment. So yung po yung sinasabi natin dito, no? That the design here is not just cognitive. Don't just feed them all the data or the information that they want, but think about what will make them care about your subject. No? Second part is the reflection part, wherein all experience needs to be deepened. No? And part of the reflection part is really, once again, allowing students to deepen and at the same time relish their own learning experience. The philosopher always said that the unexamined life is not worth living. No? Likewise, parang I think we are saying that any experience, if you don't look back at it and reflect on it, no, you will not be able to taste the richness of that experience. No? Kaya nga, di ba, parang when you have a very good experience, ang sarap balik-balikan. Or sometimes if you have a very traumatic experience, sometimes you find yourself looking back and trying to analyze what had happened. No? And I think this is the whole point behind the reflection, is for you to be able to really deepen your own insights from the experience that just happened. So the challenge here is putting it in again into our own modules, into the modules of our courseware, so that students can develop this habit that an experience is not just something that they go through, but an experience is something that they always try to deepen. So that what we are forming in our students are not just technically competent people, we want them to be persons with depth as well. And this is why reflection is very important in terms of how we would like them to, in terms of the mental habit that we'd like them to take through our online courseware. The fourth part, action part, is where recognizes the need, no, for an experience. If it is really something very engaging, no, that a person must find a way, an outlet to be able to express it. And this is where the action part comes in. No? So it's not just parang letting students do something. It's really saying, if something has captured my attention so much, and by reflecting on it, I find that it's very important, how can I manifest not only my knowledge of it, how can I express what I know? How can I contribute what I've taken away from this subject, no, or from this lesson? That's the whole point behind the action part. No? So the action part could be another activity. It could be, as I said, it could be an assessment as well, no, for the student to basically articulate or apply what he has learned. So that's the action part. No? Sometimes manggod, ang uban are finding it difficult to imagine action kaya they think na it should really be something that's, parang big, something that will really have an impact. Yes, parang it could move towards that, but it could be something as simple as, sige, apply what you have learned to this project, apply what you have learned to this quiz, apply what you have learned to this another assessment activity, or apply you have learned to another activity. No? This is the whole point behind action. And then the evaluation part, again, is important in the sense that after going through that experience, no, it teaches the student to be able to assess himself in terms of how he is growing as a person. No? And the whole point of evaluation is that it not only allows a student to take a look at what he has learned, but to take a look at how he is learning. So again, if we follow all of this, diba, parang if you follow this whole dynamics, and if you imagine this iterating, okay, and imagine this being embedded in the mindset or in the lifestyle of our students, no? What the students that we will be producing will be students really who are deep, students who are very grounded, students who have a firm or a great awareness of themselves as persons. So taking all these principles together, parang we can look at it as this, no? If the courseware is this circle, no, what we're actually doing, okay, is making sure that this courseware that we develop begins first by an understanding of the context, and in the courseware, we now incorporate that in terms of the interactions of experience, reflection, action, and evaluation. If we place that in the greater context of the teacher-learner relationship as envisioned in the IPP, it will look something like this. Wherein, as teacher, we are trying to create that learning condition so that the learner will be able to pursue and appreciate the truth. So, in other words, what we're doing in the courseware development process is once again creating this, simulating this, so that the students will take responsibility for his own learning. No? Now, as concretely expressed, no, in the way modules are to be designed, no, this part is where we apply that, the principles of IPP, as instructional design in the creation of courseware. First thing we have to recognize and accept is that unlike the face-to-face setup, this is a totally different learning environment. It's a totally different learning environment which has certain conventions. No? Now, the term that I'd like to use is cultural elements. No? Kasi an online learning environment is like entering into a new culture. Forgive me, this is where I'm employing my anthropological lens to looking at this situation. No? Like any culture, parang it has certain elements, certain conventions to allow you to become well-versed in that culture. And part of its cultural elements is that the communication in an online setup is different. No? First, it's a many-to-many communication. In the classroom, you can't have people talking at the same time, di ba? Otherwise, maingay and it will be a mess. But in an online environment, you can have people talking at the same time, no? Parang inputting data or chatting every now and then, adding their interactions while you're even talking, and feedback can be coming from many people, no? Not just one person, the person that you're calling in class, no? But sometimes parang ganun pa rin tayo mag-isip, no, na parang hindi, you cannot recite unless you raise your hand and then you recite, no? But in an online environment, it doesn't work that way. So that somebody could be talking here and somebody could be chatting, not only publicly, but also chatting privately. This is all part of the online learning environment. No? So, yun. The other is that it is place independent. So that, parang we have to take into account that probably someone might be listening to or doing his lessons while he is in some place else, no? So that sometimes parang one of the early feedback that we received was that teachers are being offended because students are, parang not really in a learning, in a conducive learning environment, no? Some of them nakahiga, or some nasa CR, or some wala, some place else, no? Parang teachers feel offended by it, no? But it's the culture of being online, no? So that parang don't take offense. Parang you even now you might be doing your cooking or taking your breakfast while we're having this meeting, but that's part of online learning, no? And that's why parang you could also be anywhere. In other words, I don't have to be here, no? Who knows, baka what I'm actually doing is that I just click the recording that I made earlier and I'm just running it as a video, no? So as a matter of fact, parang I'm not, well, not, I'm here, no? Parang I could be not here and still be doing this lecture even if I'm around because I already recorded it ahead of time, no? So who knows, baka you're just listening to a recording, no? So that's you taking advantage again of this particular environment. So you don't necessarily have to be there, no? One of the tricks that I have in my class is I record it and then I premiere it on YouTube. So that parang as a premiere, it's as if it's happening real time. So that they interact through the live chat while I'm already someplace else. Tapos, I don't have to be there. I'm just interacting through the live chat, no? So, yun, parang Courseware can take advantage of that, no? So you could be lecturing to them without necessarily being there, no? The other things here, time independent, as I said, parang if you can prepare it ahead of time and just leave it there and just go on a long vacation, tapos doon ka na sa vacation, total, nandun na lahat yung mga videos mo of your lectures. No? So, and many others, no? I won't elaborate now on the other things here. But the point here really is that it has cultural elements that we can take advantage of. No? And if we take advantage of it, it will really alleviate the stresses of teaching online. Now, going back again to the instructional design, every instructional design always talks about outcomes, activities, assessments. So ay mo katingala atong OIDP why it was there, no? Because kahit na ano, when you're planning for a course, it's always talking about that. These are essential in terms of instructional design. What is crucial as a principal, whether it's designing for a course pack that is for face-to-face teaching or a course pack that is for online courseware, it's all about making sure that your assessments are always aligned with your outcomes and that your activities serve as a bridge so that the learners will be able to attain the outcomes. No? It's the same thing. No? Now, if we look at it from the perspective of the IPP, I will shift the view. Okay. If you look at this triangle again, typically in the concrete, parang how is the IPP being taught? No? It's being taught in terms of pre-lecture, lecture, and repetitio. The pre-lecture part is the teacher preparing the student to learn about the class. In other words, it's like you're talking about the outcomes that the student is expected to learn at the end of the class. But it's not just talking about outcomes, it's you taking into account where your students might be coming from so that you can engage them, no? And not just talk over their heads because you're not understanding where they're coming from. Kaya part of pre-lecture is understanding ano bang ginawa nila dati. Ano ba yung patok sa kanila that when I introduce it, they'll be excited, no? So, kung sa instructional design, outcomes lang, so very technical and so very limited. But sa IPP, it's about pre-lecture, no? Now, the lecture part, okay, is where you're thinking about the activities, no? The actual learning experience of the students. What will I give them so that they can be engaged in the lesson that I am teaching? No? And then the third part is the repetitio. How can I reinforce the learning so that they'd be able to understand and they'd be able to learn for themselves what they're supposed to learn? No? All of this, kumbaga in the concrete, is the concrete method of the IPP. Now, the principles behind it underlies the pre-lecture, lecture, and repetitio. So that, once again, if we are to take a look at it, okay, it will look something like this, no? Now, the context, experience, reflection, action, evaluation, this is what's behind the concrete arrangement in terms of pre-lecture, lecture, and repetitio. All of these components are informed by the principles of the IPP. Now, let's take a look at how this plays out. No? So in the design of the course, some of the questions here I've revised so that it could be adapted in terms of online learning. So in terms of the context, question here is, what do I need to know about my students at this time of the pandemic in order to prepare to teach them well online? So notice in this pandemic, so I think we have to be conscious at this point that the courseware that we are creating is considerate of the situation of students in a pandemic. If we are having difficult times in this pandemic, I'm sure our students are also having an equally difficult time. And this is why parang an appeal, no, that our courses have to take into account parang that situation. No? Now, we're not saying that we should be watering down what we have to teach. We're saying that we should devise strategies so that we can take into account where our students are coming from at this point. The next, in terms of experience, is how do we create engaging online learning experiences to help our students care or connect to the subjects that we're teaching. Notice the use again of the affective terms. These are very Ignatian in a sense, because what is always asking in terms of experience is, paano ko ba matutulungan para hindi lang sila cognitively but affectively engaged and involved in the subject, no? So that's why we're saying, how do you teach it? How do you design it so that they will care about your subject, no? Not care because they're afraid, no? So sometimes I think yun yung, if we have a toxic academic culture in the Philippines, yun na parang the subject is already difficult as it is, but it's even made more difficult because it seems that to care about the subject, you have to be punitive, no? But that's different. Parang if you compare that to strategies of how teachers are teaching, halimbawa, if we benchmark with universities overseas, no? Hindi ganun yung experience, no? Dito lang sa Pilipinas talaga yung grabe pag no? Parang kawawa ka talaga pag estudyante ka, no? But in other places, you would know, no? For those who have experienced how it is to study elsewhere, you would see how different it is parang as it is being taught in other places, no? That the top universities, kumbaga, the subject matter itself is difficult, no? And always what the teacher is trying to do is to make it seem easy, no? Not lessen the difficulty, but the instructional challenge is to make it seem easy for the students. So reflection and action part, basically I did not change that except by adding that this reflection takes into context again the online learning environment. The action part, it's the same question practically. The evaluation part is still the same question, but an even greater challenge in terms of, so how do we figure this out in terms of an online environment? Later, I will show concrete examples of how this could be implemented. So taking into account, once again, the IPP, okay? So online courseware development could be seen as, once again, parang teacher creating the environment so that the learner can pursue and appreciate the truth. So whether the truth is something that you express in our own disciplines, whether through entrepreneurship or accountancy or business management or marketing, or all the other disciplines that we would have in the School of Business and Governance, it's still the same thing. We're trying to teach them about certain truths about our discipline. In the concrete, all these components, all these principles in the IPP could be concretized in terms of components that we would expect in a typical courseware. No? But we're not thinking, we don't want to think of courseware in general because that would be very daunting. But let's think of the basic unit in a courseware, which is a module. No? And this is where the IPP as instructional design could be concretized. No? Because if you look at these components, there's an overview part, a learning outcomes part, the required learning activity or resource. It could be as many as you want here, but taking into consideration certain design principles then. The reflection part, the learning assessment. Now, one of the realities that we have to accept in an online education is it's difficult to give all the content that we used to give in an online setup. We have to distill it And all the other things we put in under as further resources so that the more industrious students could also parang be guided towards learning on their own further, no? While at the same time preserving the essentials that need to be taught in a particular lesson or in a particular module. And then the latter part of this component is the evaluation. The difference between the reflection and the evaluation, as concretely expressed in a module in a courseware, is that the reflection focuses on the actual content of the lesson that is to be learned, while the evaluation part focuses on the overall learning experience of the students. How this plays out is, again, those components are organized according to prelectio, lectio, and repetitio. We've already talked about this earlier, prelectio, the lectio, and repetitio. But how it shows up in terms of how it organizes those components will be something that we will show later. So in the concrete, you have this, preparing the student, the actual part where the student does the job, and then the repetition part which reinforces the learning of the students. Despite this structured method, there are certain overriding principles which need to be taken into account in the design of courses or courseware. The first here is cura personalis, second is non multa sed multum, and third is tantum quantum. Now, all these Latin terms are really, in a sense, principles that we embody in Jesuit education. Cura personalis, we're very familiar with that. It means care for the person. What does this mean? Despite the fact that you have this, you already know the content and you know how to teach it, and the point here is that the learning experiences that happen in an online environment should always be adapted to the condition of the student engaged in it. Now, that phrase, that sentence is actually not an original sentence because it is something that you will find explicitly in the writings of Saint Ignatius of Loyola in the 19th annotation of the spiritual exercises. That's why, despite the fact that the spiritual exercises, in a sense, is like a very structured course on spirituality, the main principle there is that it always has to be adapted. You don't give it as it is. You don't follow it as it is, but you always adapt it to the context of the learner. That's one point. Second overriding principle, non multa sed multum, which means not many but much. So here, I think part of what makes it difficult to learn in online learning is because it's very tiring to be learning online. The same seat time that you spend in a face-to-face environment cannot be replicated in an online environment. I'm sure, in the literature, parang 2 hours of lecture, every 2 hours of lecture, parang as an adult learner would need to have a break after 2 hours of lecture. It's in the education literature. But in this case, it's even more difficult kasi one of the best practices in courseware development for online education is the whole idea of compressing seat time so that for example, if you have something that you would normally learn for an hour, you design it in such a way that it could be something that could only be done half the time of what it used to take to do it in a face-to-face setup. So you can't have students really, parang imagine if a student has 5 subjects in a day. Imagine, and then they'd be there for 1 hour 30 minutes. And then all of that, they'd be spending 1 hour 30 minutes, those 5 subjects just in one day. Imagine how tiring that is. Ako nga ngayon, parang right now, my eyesight is really becoming more and more blurred. And at the end of the day, parang, I don't know, parang I have this involuntary twitches in my eye. I think it's because parang of this long hours of just meeting people and, parang being online, no? So I don't know, maybe, if we don't adopt this principle, it's going to be tiring again for everyone, no? Especially our students. But not only that, no? I think the focus of non multa sed multum is really in Jesuit education. Our aim is really mastery of a subject. No? Um, while this might seem like a tension, especially for those of us who are always parang thinking of preparing our students to take the board exams, no? So there's that tension because in board exam, parang you hope to cover at least all the things in preparation for that, no? And I think this is where parang within our discipline, maybe it's a challenge, no? Because surely we can't think of everything, but it's a challenge for us to think of how we could develop mastery, no, without really overwhelming students. Because otherwise, if you overwhelm them, it all fails, no. I'm sure some of the programs here have been effective at finding that balance, no. But it will be especially challenging in terms of an online environment. Um, next, next principle here is tantum quantum. So what we're saying is that loosely it means as much as it helps. No? So there are no hard and fixed rules here. No? What we're saying is that all the learning experiences that we will incorporate should be adapted in as much to the extent that they help students to learn. If it hinders students from learning, then scrap it. No? If it becomes an obstacle to really learning, then parang let go of it. No? Initially, I experimented with a gamification platform in my courses, but at some point, students were having difficulties because of their connection, and some were not really used to a gamified setup. So, parang a month and a half after that, after we started that, I had to shift and adapt to another platform. Only because parang if it wasn't helping the students, then I think I have to adjust. Despite the fact that I have invested so much in that particular platform. No? So again, it's the whole principle between tantum quantum. No? In planning out the activities that we have, always think in terms of what would help students to learn. No? And that should be a guiding and overriding principle in terms of course design. Another characteristic of the modules or the courseware in the modules is interactivity. So this interactivity could be conceived in terms of student to content, student to student, and student to instructor. Now, it doesn't mean that all these things should be present in every module, but at least we're conscious that there should be a variety in terms of the interactions that can happen within the modules or the courseware that we're developing. So student-to-student content could be as simple as providing opportunities for student to be able to interact with the content, such as in a video, you can have prompts there. And this is where later parang, that's why we will introduce some of the tools, no, in future sessions. No? Students can interact with the lectures that you have. No? Students can write something or parang do something with the content to make the quizzes more interactive and so on and so forth. In terms of student-to-student interactivity, you have tools within Moodle wherein, you can have forums there. You can still make use of collaborative documents so that they could work together as a group or as a team. Now, another interaction is student to instructor. We have all these web conferencing software. We can maximize this. But it doesn't only mean web conferencing software. Part of the student-instructor interaction is when, especially for example, when we respond to students in their emails, when we interact with them through chat, chat could be embedded also in the courseware. When we're giving very specific feedback in terms of their work or in terms of their assignments, that's already an example of a student-instructor interaction. So that if you're designing a truly asynchronous course, where you have all your lectures there, part of your student-instructor interaction could be in terms of the feedback that you will give for assignments that they will submit, so that they still sense that the professor is still guiding them, or at least to conduct consultations for students who would want to verify something. So these are ways to imagine this student to instructor interaction. So if we look back, as I said, this module on Moodle basically contains all these aspects. Okay. Wait, I'm just so what you have here is a sample module. I think in Diagler, if you have access to Diagler, there is, under the category online education, there is a course there which is called Adu Courseware What's in a Module, which contains an example of this. So each of these elements basically highlight the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. And maybe later I can demonstrate a working sample of this, or if you have access to Diagler, you can look at that so that you will see what's in it. So all of this are making use of components or activities available in Moodle. But this is just a basic, kumbaga, basic tool. You can upgrade it further, parang to make it even more interactive. Likewise, for those who are not yet part of the Courseware development process, this could also find itself even if you're using Google Classroom. But the only difference is that in Moodle, parang we can activate other features to make it really, more at par with the best courseware modules that are being offered by major courseware providers. So looking at how these principles are related to the components in a typical module. So for pre-lecture, the overview is an example of a pre-lecture. The statement of the learning outcomes is an example of pre-lecture. The further resources that you place in there is an example of a pre-lecture. Why? Because it also prepares students to learn on their own, to pursue other content, especially if it's content that they want to learn more about. Now, the lecture part refers to the required activities or required materials that you put up in the module. The repetition part would be that reflection, the learning assessments that you put in, and also the evaluation tool at the end of every module. So how does this concrete arrangement of pre-lecture, lecture, and repetition, which is found in the courseware, how does this interact with the overall IPP? All of this design takes into account the context of the students. The experience part is really the entire module that you create where the students experience, go through a learning experience. You could be more particular about it by saying that the required activity or resource is the actual learning experience. But really, in the spirit of the IPP, everything that you create there, in fact, is part of the experience. The next part is the reflection part. And this reflection is concretized, can be concretized in that component which talks about reflection specifically. But it could also be reflected in the learning assessments in order to assess as well, parang how much of the content did the students learn, or how much of the objectives did the students actually attain in the course of taking this particular module. Now, the action part, could be either part of the activity that they need to do, or also part of the learning assessment that is embedded in the module. Now, the evaluation part could take two forms. The learning assessment could also be seen as the evaluation in that module, or properly, the evaluation module, which refers to a reflection on the overall experience, that would be specifically parang a concrete addition to the module to really instill this habit of looking back and evaluating and assessing themselves in terms of their overall learning. So as you can see, parang it's the IPP as design being placed again in the module that you can find here. So it's all here. Now, other aspects of it, in particular, uh, in the courseware, in the Moodle courseware that we're creating, one characteristic is that we will be adapting what is called as adaptive release. No? So this is where, for those who are Moodle users, non-Moodle users, this is the part where we activate yung completion tracking, no? So that students are only able to access the content only after they've accomplished or they've met the conditions needed to complete a particular activity. So this helps in terms of creating a more asynchronous learning environment, no? And using this strategically later on in future iterations of our course can help design our courses so that they can be more adaptive to students. So for example, if they don't meet the passing grade, they will be redirected to siguro a refresher module, a refresher component. Or if they were able to get the score perfectly, then they'll be given a more advanced material, no? So it could be, parang later on we could strategically play with this. But for now, it could be something as basic as just making sure that the students fulfill the requirements before they can move to the next parts of the module. Another concept here in module creation and courseware development is chunking. Now, this is very, again, essential because in online education, as with offline education, you cannot inundate students with a lot of material at the same time. But here, the question, which is difficult, there are no hard and fast rules here. But really, it's trying to imagine, as subject matter experts, how much content do you really have to have before you need to stop and in a sense, assess or review or summarize that content, no? So much of it, I think, is something, it's more of your call, no? I think you would know better as subject matter experts in terms of how content could be chunked into bite-sized pieces. Because this is, again, a characteristic of online courseware, no? If you look at what is being provided there, kita mo, parang all the module content, no? Parang a lecture would be mahaba na yung 15 minutes na lecture, no? And then the activity, sometimes the longest that you'd have would be something for 30 minutes. No? But the important thing, even if it's a very complicated topic, parang how could we chunk it so that, parang it becomes more digestible for students? So this is what we're actually addressing. In the courseware, there's a part there where we have to put in the duration, which the duration or the expected time for a student, or the recommended pace for a student to accomplish an activity. Now that helps in terms of chunking, and that also helps students in terms of planning ahead, in terms of the time that they would need to spend in order to accomplish a module. Now, one of the ways to do it, which we will find in the courseware course design blueprint. Now, these are all tools that I will be sharing with you. It's best way to do it is to time yourself and see parang how much time you need in order to be able to accomplish an activity, and just add in more time anticipating parang the amount of time that learners will need in order to take it. Another concept in courseware design is scheduling breathing space. We've already said about how learning could be exhausting, but one of the ways of resolving it is to think of it, to, to look at the activities that you have and to plan the course, the duration of the course in terms of time on task. What is time on task? Time on task is the total learning time that is spent by a student in a course. Now, this time on task is actually broken down into two components. The instructional time, which is the time where the instructor or where materials are, where you're basically introducing or explaining about materials. And then the time spent on accomplishing tasks, which is the time that the students will need in order to accomplish it. So usually what happens, teaching end up stressful because if you're not conscious of the time on task, what happens is you might be actually exceeding the required number of time that you need in order to teach a course. No? When you think about it, diba, parang typically if you're teaching an 18-week course, it's about 54 hours. Now imagine breaking down that 54 hours into saying, let's say 8 hours will really be about content where I will be doing the actual teaching. And the rest of that, no, I design it in such a way that all delivery of instruction I will do in 8 hours or let's say 12 hours. And then the rest of those hours will be times that the students will do. So that typically the student will just be spending 54 hours for the subject. No? And I think when we exceed that time, then it makes it difficult really. And it makes online education more difficult. Kasi hindi nga siya pareho nung face-to-face no? Na ito parang imagine you'll be doing this task and you're doing it online. So you could be spending more than 100 hours just for a subject, no? If we're not conscious of that, no? And that's why it's a good help in terms of parang thinking about instructional time and time spent on accomplishing tasks so that you can make your course really more cohesive and more user-friendly. And also more manageable for you as teacher. Because part of your instructional time is the time that you spend actually grading or checking the content that they put in the courseware. That covers your instructional time. No? So if you keep on assigning more and more content, you'd also increase your instructional time in a sense. No? Kaya yun parang without us realizing it, parang we're suddenly seeing na parang bakit stressful magturo nito? No? Because it's kumbaga getting bloated beyond what you actually need in order to teach a course, the actual amount of time you need to teach a course. No? So these are just what I've introduced right now is just the instructional design and some of the principles involved in terms of designing a course. So maybe at this point I'll stop with that and perhaps entertain questions that you may have about the course, about what we've discussed at this point. I will also show you a sample of the things that I mentioned earlier. So maybe I'll pause muna and perhaps if there are questions, parang later I will just direct you to what you could look into so that parang this will be more concretized in terms of how you could imagine this courseware development process to be. So, ayun po. If you have questions or at least at this point concerns or issues that you recognize, or that you'd like to ask answers, uh, that you'd like to inquire about, you can now ask them and make suggestions as well.
Good morning, Father. Jovi Castro po.
Hi, Joe.
Opo.
Hello.
I just would like to ask, Father, kasi this is an hour and a half class, di ba? I mean, per subject. So, hahatiin po yan sa lecture and parang activity ng mga bata, Father? Parang ganun ba ang magiging ano nito?
Okay. Ang typically, I think yun nga, parang yung the first thing here is, when we're thinking of 1 hour and 30, again, we're confining ourselves to dapat 1 hour 30, 1 hour 30 lagi. But if we think, for example, how many hours would it really take for you to parang adequately teach the content? So that parang you can have parang a 30-minute thing, and then just space it out accordingly so that students can take it at their own pace, and parang take it, um, um, in other words, parang you don't have to force yourself nor the students to observe yun 1 hour 30 minutes, because you could chunk it, for example, into 30 minutes, which they can do easily. And before they know it, parang if they just keep on progressing at their own pace, then it could be that they could accomplish it in even before the semester ends, no? Pero yun, parang it's not really, parang kaya parang we're thinking outside of that traditional setup na kailangan ipilit mo siya in 1 hour 30 minutes. Now, ang example of what they done, halimbawa when they're developing sa philo, yung ethics course, one module actually can run for 2 weeks because it's parang may certain number of hours there, no? So parang it's one module, but it can be done typically with the recommended pace. If you're devoting 30 minutes per day, you can complete it in 2 weeks. So ang kina nila na, okay, they mark up how much time is needed to teach this, and then factoring it, how much time do students need to work on it. So parang it doesn't depend on the schedule that you have, but it's organized in terms of yung time that they need, so that they could, parang cover material without feeling too stressed that kailangan i-fill in itong time na to, and that they only have to do it at this particular time.
Okay po.
So yun, parang yun yung promise ng online education, na you can plan out your day, and I say, for this week, tapusin ko na yung isang course ko. I will work on it because I will put in the hours to do it. And then after that, I will proceed to the next course and finish it. No? So that gusto ko, by December, tapos na isang course ko, so that makafocus na ako sa iba. But it assures that the student will have covered the expected number of hours that is needed, that he needs in order to complete a course.
Opo. So parang ano na yan, Father, sa pace na ng estudyante talaga tayo mag-base, hindi na dito sa teachers. Kumbaga, pwede nating ibigay sabay-sabay, Father, parang ganon, and then we will just give them the time to check, evaluate what they have done, parang ganon?
Yeah, pwedeng ganon na yung ano, and the time that the teacher spends is, parang you can just say, I have 3 classes, I will devote an hour to those classes, just to log in and then check if they submitted anything. If there are questions there, I'll answer it. So you just have 3 hours. You won't have to force yourself to attend to that schedule or teach to that schedule and force yourself through a 1 hour 30 or 3 hour lecture. In a sense, win-win.
Pwedeng iwanan, Father.
Oo.
Pwedeng iwanan ng estudyante. Balikan mo na lang if he or she is done with activity.
Yeah. And maybe sometimes magpasok dyan, pero yun, may set time ka lang to look at it. No? Pero that's part of your instructional time. No? But basically, the student Kasi nandun na yung lecture mo, naturo na, nandun na, you design it so that they can work on it on their own. All you have to do is to just give feedback as it comes in, and just say throughout the semester, basta I'll devote 3 hours or maybe 3 hours to just checking online. The rest of it, bahala ka na. Basta 3 hours you're devoting for those 3 classes.
Father, does this fit yung bagong ano natin plano na magiging ano, hindi semester ang tawag doon, term? Does this fit that to that ano po? Type of ano yung
that's why we were proposing it parang as scaffolding for this, no? Pero ngayon kasi medyo difficult, di ba? But if we do our courseware like this, that's the natural ano, no? In fact nga, parang you can just have, parang you don't need to think of terms even. Parang you just need to think of the number of hours needed for a student to complete a course. That's what you will find sa mga online courseware if you take diba?
Hours.
Hours lang. And the way they do it is because they plan instructional time spent by students. You put it together, you accomplish the 54 hours needed in order to complete a course. So they can complete it in a month's time. So pag natapos na sa and they take it, hayahay ka na, one less student to worry about, di ba? And the rest of the semester, okay,
hayahay.
Hayahay ka na lang, di ba?
And then depende sa student.
Depende sa student. And then the next semester, you just have to refresh your course. Hintay ka na lang din ulit kasi wala ka na kailangang prepare. Na-prepare mo na eh. So eventually, eventually it's going to be easy for all of us.
But yung first father, mahirap pa konti mag-adjust.
Yung po yung mahirap kasi ang pag-design in such a way na kaya ng student to take all the content with the instructions that you write so that he could learn on his own. Yun lang po, yun na talaga yung mahirap, yung just this hump that we will have to go through. But after that, it will really revolutionize parang and free us up for many things. It won't be as stressful as what we've experienced when we suddenly shifted.
So wala na tayong face-to-face, Father, hanggang in the future, it will all be online. Parang gano'n?
Well, if we will return face-to-face, the time where we will be interacting with the students, yun na lang yun. Parang we can have office hours where kung kailangan talaga where we can discuss, that's the only time we'll have. But all the rest, they can do outside of that. No?
Pwede na palang mag-travel mga estudyante nito, Father. They go Korea or wherever.
May faculty, pwede na mag-travel.
Wow!
Actually, yan ang promise ng online education. You don't have to be here in order to teach.
May ganon. When will this start, Father? Next school year or?
Well, depende as soon as you complete it. Pero as Dean Janners told me, you will commence now the courseware development by second sem. But halimbawa ang philo, yung ethics 1000, nagsimula na kasi sila nag-start na kasi sila. But they said that they will finish it by October 26. So lahat ng nagaturo ng ethics 1000, parang ganon. They don't have to worry for the second semester.
Wow.
Sila parang, sige, basta nandiyan
prepared na.
Oo. So yun po yung promise nitong medyo courseware. Kasi initially parang ang hirap talaga gawin. Pero pag nagawa mo na, pwede na tayo mag-bakasyon.
Liwaliw. Internet lang, Father.
Doon ka na lang mag-check, tsaka and you don't have to spend the entire day on it. Diba? So right now, si Father Tony, he already built his courses. In fact, parang nakagawa siya 6 courses already. So tuwang-tuwa siya kasi next sem, kahit na may load siya, he has more time for research. Yun kasi yung trip niya, mag-research. So hindi mag-travel. Ako, ang inisip ko lagi, paano natin to gawin so that we'll have more time to travel?
Ayun. Wow.
So you could be in Japan and still be teaching.
Right.
You don't have to be here.
Oh, nice.
Yun po yung but yun parang we are in a sense moving towards that direction. No? Kaya nag-iiba talaga, parang that's why parang we're trying to leave behind the traditional structures that we have, because in online education doesn't really work that way. Parang it's going to be your time, it's going to be your place. So
my time and my place.
yes. So you don't have to be coming to school all the time, because
Ay,
there you'll just devote time to attend to students learning.
okay lang yung kay Father, Father OG, Father Tabora na
That's
work
that's
from home.
that's where we're moving. Kaya
Ay.
nga it's going to revolutionize parang how we're going to teach. Ganun po.
Wow.
Kasi hindi naman ibig sabihin na hindi ka nagbo-work. Ang ibig sabihin is that the time that you used to spend, you could spend for something else, because now mag-check ka na lang ng papers and then grade or give feedback, respond to students, and that's it. But all the others, parang you can update your material. Siguro that's the only thing that you need to keep on doing. You could just be coaching, guiding students, or if you feel that there's a need to really meet them to deepen a topic because they're finding it difficult, then parang you schedule it na lang on the time that you have. But at the rest, you don't have to be there.
Exciting.
Ganun po yung direction natin ng sa online education. So, kaya, well, ako personally, parang I'm looking forward to that, because yun nga, parang in a sense parang it's a solution to what we are experiencing right now, na nagsistick ka sa same structure mo, pero ang hirap talaga, and it's not effective. Parang it ends up stressing everyone else, no? But once we have this, parang I think I'm looking forward to a time where we could be doing something else and still assure that we are giving the education that our students expect of us.
Wow.
In other words, pag natapos po yun, it will lessen your burden as a teacher, and also the students as well. And it will make you more available for other things.
Yeah. Nasanay naman din kami, Father, sa online. So maganda talaga itong plano. But I don't know with the others, Father, they might want to ask also.
Sige po. Thanks,
Thank you
Joey.
po.
Father. Margie po.
Hi, Marge.
Father, may tanong lang po ako with respect to the ownership of the courseware, because this was raised during our department meeting. Who will have ownership of this courseware? And then, if let's say, for example, if you will be invited somewhere else to do some lecture, are we allowed to use some of the materials that we shared in the courseware to use that for the specific purpose?
Yes. Thank you, Marge. That was actually a question that was raised to me. I'll just read the reply I made to that to that question. Kasi right now, I will still review what we have in the university, in terms of intellectual property. But as stated in, wait, let me just look at yung reply na yun. Okay. Yung kwan po, ito yung sa Intellectual Property Code. Okay. The yung IP code explicitly says, in the case of original literary and artistic works, copyright shall belong to the author of the work, except for save for these exceptions. First, in the case of work created by an author during and in the course of his employment, the copyright shall belong to the employee if the creation of the object of copyright is a part is not a part of his regular duties, even if the employee uses the time, facilities, and materials of the employer. B, the employer, if the work is the result of the performance of his regularly assigned duties, unless there is an agreement, express or implied to the contrary. So as an educational institution, university employs faculty members to teach courses that are offered in the university. Included in the teaching duties are A, developing teaching materials intended to promote student learning, B, carrying out the planned learning activities, and C, evaluating and reporting student performance vis-a-vis the expected university standards. Thus, based on the IP code, materials developed for teaching are deemed to be owned by the university.
Thank you po, Father.
Oh, yun po. But ito po yung aking isa pang proposal doon kasi um, to incentivize and maybe later on parang as we develop more and more specialized courses pa, maybe we could, to incentivize faculty, we could we could think of other schemes para parang a subject that is being taught by an expert on that matter can be something na can also be financially lucrative for that professor as well. Pwede po 'yun parang in later parang I'm still thinking at this point. I'm trying to study parang the other schemes that they have, no? In other among other courseware providers. But for now, yun yung aking March, parang the precedent that I'm just following. No? So yun to the question that you raised.
Thank you po, Father.
Okay. Sige, Emil. How will from Eminel, how will this impact faculty loading? What will be the long-term effect on this on the employment status of the faculty? Okay. So I think practically it's the same. Parang the same number of units. I don't think we will be changing that loading. No, you could be teaching several courses, and basically the time that you used to spend teaching will be the instructional time that you will use just for parang following up. So in a sense, the role of the teachers will become more facilitative rather than the primary na it will not be a totally instructor-led course in the sense that you will always have to be there. But I think your commitment there is in terms of the number of hours that you will have to devote in order to just attend to make yourself available for student needs. But once it's there, in fact, parang you don't have to consume most of the time, but at least you know that these are the times that you would need just for these classes. I don't think it will change faculty our faculty loading. And in terms of its employment status, at least those that we have in right now, parang I don't think it's going to alter that, no. Especially once the courseware has been built already. Ang ma-alter lang talaga yung in terms of yung nga parang the how we're imagining parang seat time, how we're imagining parang even yung that a particular class has to be in a certain location at the same time, no. But I don't think parang at least in my mind parang I don't think that employment status of the faculty will be affected, no? Because it's still the same. I mean, whatever you have made, parang it's still the same thing, no? That will be that you are teaching as a matter of fact if you're going to administer a course. So kwan po, I don't think we will see. That's why parang in my idea, no, I'm not eliminating the need for teachers, because I think this is where the hallmark of our Jesuit education is, and the hallmark of our courseware, no? That in as much as these courses can practically run on their own, the personal contact with the teachers is very necessary. Kaya yung whole idea of mentoring it's really parang more in line with this with courseware development. So parang we'll be acting as more as mentors rather than yung parang providers lang of information. So that's why you would still need teachers even in this paradigm. Parang I don't see the only thing that would make a teacher obsolete is if the teacher cannot adapt to parang the technology and the format that we will now be using. So parang ang challenge for teachers is really to learn the technology. So I think that's the only thing that will affect someone from participating in the movement that is happening right now.
Hello, Father. Good afternoon. Yeah, Father, good morning. Si Geoffrey.
I joke. Sorry.
Okay. Yon sana akong camera.
Sure.
Kita akong pagkagwapo. Anyway.
Mayo.
Okay. Father, I would just like to clarify lang, Father, if in developing our courseware, we have to set, parang what you're saying is we have to set a suggested deadline, parang ganon, for let's say para matapos niya yung let's say isang task or formative assessment, parang ganon po.
Yes, a recommended pace.
So in other words, Father, kung ang isang estudyante is ayoko muna siyang gawin, recommended lang man, so pwedeng mag-submit siya. Let's say ang deadline is within a week or suggested lang man. So pwede siyang mag-exceed, mag-abot ng 1 month, 2 months na submission. Pwede pong ganon, di ba? Parang ganon ang dating.
As long as he completes the number of hours. Pero I think if that's why if we're able to plan out beforehand how much time a student needs to accomplish a subject, then maybe we could decide, maybe not the second semester, but once we start it, we could say na parang within this time, mag-close na yung kwan mo. You won't be able to access the course. So you have an entire semester to work on the number of hours that you need. Kasi ganun din naman sa courseware. After a certain time, may recommended pace siya, pero meron siyang allotment na parang grace period after it. But after it, you lose access to the courseware. So, pwede natin yan. Maybe not for the second semester kasi we're developing. But once it's there, then we could actually use that para naman to help our students kasi may iba talaga hirapan sila without that structure eh. But we can always put in a grace period. Kunyari, you have a semester and you need 54 hours in order to complete a particular course. Diba?
Okay.
You can complete that. Let's say sabihin ko, naning jug ko. In 3 days, dili ko matulog kay i-complete na ko ang course. Diba? So, mana siya. Pero naiuban nga, 54 hours pa bitaw. Sige, sa end na lang na ako ikuan, no? So, kung i-try niya sa end, kumbaga ang limit mo within this time, dapat a course could be completed, no? And then may grace period ka lang so that kumbaga pag hindi niya ginawa yon, then in a sense parang he would have failed the course parang in that case, no?
So that would sige pare. Sorry.
Yeah. In that case parang that would in a sense parang provide a certain structure for the students, no? Pero yun nga, ang problema ngayon, ang problema natin, kasi situation ng pandemic eh. No? I think we need to be more, shall we say, parang more considerate na there are many factors involved as to why students are not able to accomplish things on time. But siguro parang if things get normalized, then maybe we could start parang putting in parang a certain bracket, no? Parang bookends in terms of how long a student can actually work on a course. Pero within that, he could space his learning accordingly.
So in other words, Father, this semester, yung i-develop muna namin na courseware would be a suggested deadline, pero pwede siyang, we will follow the, primer na dapat matapos niya within the year. Parang ganun, di ba? But even kasi yung primer is dapat matapos mo man siya within the year ang isang subject. Parang ganun. So masyadong relax yung estudyante because based on my experience, Father, no, na na tendency because of medyo lax, 1 year pa bitaw. So murag medyo mag-submit ang estudyante after a month, after 2 months, parang ganon. But because it's online, kasi because of the pandemic, so there's a tendency na dili na sila ikwan nila, murag i-delay nila. But siguro what you're saying, later on, we will improve the courseware or we will enhance the courseware na meron ng time limit, parang ganon.
Yeah. Kasi our primer was really a response to an emergency situation. And I think parang at least right now, we're still parang we can't really set a policy unless we fix muna our courseware. And so when we fix it, then I think we could put in parang what we think, parang especially an experience coming from the ground in terms of the need to put in more structure. But we can make that case once maayos natin, kasi ngayon parang ano pa ba, marag nagkanya-kanya tayo, di ba, in terms of our response, no? So yun yung isang ano din parang outcome nito, no? Once we have more courses parang already developed, then we could put in siguro a more grounded and realistic na structure. Kasi
so may limit.
Totoo ka, I agree with you. Hirap talaga ang psychology ng mga bata kay one pa bitaw. Pero ang kwan nito, ayahay ka basta within a pananglitan, no? I can imagine parang if we created para in terms of number of hours, bahala ka dyan sa 54 hours mo within a semester. When you're going to take it, basta within a semester, make responsible use of the 54 hours that you need in order to complete the course. But after that, bigyan ka lang siguro ng grace period. After that, wala na. Di ba?
F na, bagsak na.
Parang realistic yun, di ba? Kaya magkwan yung ka estudyante, para mapigusgod ka nga, sige, i-plan ako within my semester. Pero that means nga, planado, klaro sa courseware nga ingana. Di ba? I think mas kwan yun sa atin kasi kita man po estudyante, di ba? Mag-wait man dyan ka until kadugay pa bitaw.
But Father, thank you. Salamat sa pag-clarify.
Father, may
ay sige po.
Father, may question. Sorry.
Who is speaking po? Sorry.
Go ahead, Ma'am Don.
Donna.
Lang ako.
Hi, Don.
Father, this is Donna.
Hi, Don.
Yeah. Father, are you familiar, Father, with SRA?
Oh, yes. When I was younger, my favorite.
Kasi sa Ateneo before, ginagamit kasi yung SRA. So I was thinking, di ba the courseware can be something similar? Kasi ang SRA is divided, di ba, colors kasi yan to move up to the next level.
On pace. Correct. Parang SRA po ang mangyayari.
Parang SRA talaga ito, di ba? Of course, it's more complex lang because of the activities in there. So pwede parang siyang ganon na style, di ba?
Opo, tama.
For as long as it is completed on the 54 hours.
Yes. Thank you for that analogy.
Yeah.
I think yan SRA. Kasi maybe yung iba parang
SRA.
familiar with SRA. But SRA po, di ba, parang bahala ka, mabilis ang student matapos. Basta nandyan yan.
Nandyan na yan. It's all set. Tapos may different levels kasi ng subject until the very end.
Correct.
Okay, yun lang,
SRA
Father.
po, parang SRA ang courseware.
Yeah. Thank you, Father.
Thank you po. Thank you, Don. Somebody else wanted to ask a question po. So please feel free.
Father Cleo, okay na po. Natanong na ni Mo na same thought lang po.
Okay. Thank you.
Father, additional question, Jovi Castro po.
Ay, sige. Jovi, go ahead.
I have a question. Is there really a time, like how many hours should we be talking to them? Like live or synchronous, or meron ding time na asynchronous? Ano ba, may mga ganong guidelines ba, Father, or wala?
Wala tayong guideline po in terms of that. Kasi ang kuha natin, yung first we think of yung total time on task.
Hours. Oo.
So for example, di ba, yun siguro parang we could determine that, and then i-break it down natin so that within that total time on task ka lang talaga magwo-work ang pag-design mo ng course mo.
So
So
it's
that-
possible, Father, na asynchronous ka all the way?
Yes. In fact, yung course that I designed, hindi na ako kailangan pumasok doon sa klase. Yung sa akin po, yung sa amin na elective. May points lang doon na if need be, they could, parang we'll make ourselves available. Pero ni-record na po namin lahat ng lectures and the activities. So,
Okay.
I mean, kasi ako especially because of this administrative na task, I've designed it so that I don't have to be in my classes.
Yun na nga, Father. So pagka-umpisa, pwede kang mag-synchronous, then give them all the necessary details, and then we'll just give them yung anong schedule. So parang gano'n?
Opo, yun lang. Parang you meet your class, explain to them how this works, and then put in lang just a time there where if
Hayahay nga.
parang milestones mo. So hayahay yun.
Hayahay talaga, no?
Ganun po yung promise ng courseware natin. Kasi yun talaga dapat ang ating pag-online ed.
So even international students, Father, ganito na rin ang adoption ng ating education.
So, lalo na for international students, kasi sila, different time zone pa sila. No? So yun, parang to make it something that they could do at their own pace. Kasi yung international students po natin, marami nagbo-work pa. No?
Yun na nga, OFWs pa iba.
Ito. Yeah.
Wow. So how long do we usually update our courseware or the course pack, Father, online?
Well, we can talk about that, but ideally parang kasi nga may evaluation part tayo, no? We could always evaluate at the end of every semester parang if there are materials or designs that need to be tweaked so that it would be more suited pa for students. Pero yun na lang, dagdag ka na lang. Kung kunyari tingin mo parang ay gusto ko naman ayusin yung production ko ng aking lecture. So mag-record, tas yun ang upload natin na bago.
Talaga exciting ito,
Ayahay
Father.
po yan in the future.
So when are we going to start this? Biglang ganun.
Yun po yung kwan, I will be as similar to what I've done in the other schools. I will wait for your decision in terms of the timelines that you will make, because what we can do is I will be providing additional, and dito na po si Lynn has already attended our instructional design. Para that's the first of a series of training. But parang if you have the entire second semester to start working on it, parang that will really give you enough time to create really wonderful courseware. So ang kwan lang po, I will be giving input, tapos will be coaching faculty, especially course developers, in terms of how it can be done, what tools can be used. So yun yung next steps natin after this session.
Okay, Father. Thank you po.
Sige. My question pa po, is the flexi learning applicable in our junior, senior, high upper students? We've introduced it to them, to the administrators, pero they're still talking about it kasi ang difficulty kasi yun nga yung unlike sa higher ed, ang basic ed really relies on a certain structure. But what I think about it is that siguro certain levels need to be prepared so that pagdating nila ng college, hindi sila magulat na sobrang ako na lang pala bahala nito, no? But we've already started our conversations with the basic ed units. Much of it, yung itong flexi learning na to, will really depend on its acceptability to the administrators and the teachers, no? Pero yun po, kailangan talaga maglabas tayo doon sa dating paradigm natin if we're going to implement this. Pero hopefully mukha nila kasi stress din yung mga bata eh. In fact, parang ito nga, parang this solution that I'm proposing is really to help us parang survive this pandemic na hindi naman tayo stress balls palagi, no? But still we're able to do the things and we can still effectively meet our goals despite the pandemic. Okay, see, Donna, if the courseware has been made already, there can, no? As a matter of fact, parang once the base courseware is built and distributed to the faculty can customize it, no, further if they want, no? But all the customizations we can put together so that we can improve the base courseware. So yun yung upgrade natin so that every time parang may iterations tayo in terms of improving it. So things that you discover as you teach or manage your own courseware, we could put in all the learnings and incorporate it in the base. No? So hindi naman po mawawala yun. Parang this is only a step in assuring that we have a base standard in terms of what courseware will like. But some will be more enterprising. But all additions will take into account, of course, the design principles in terms of how courseware should be. Because otherwise, it defeats the purpose of what we're doing in terms of, kumbaga, standardizing the feel and the look of the courseware. Only full-time. Yan po, hindi ko po ma-answer kasi I think I've only given the administrators parang a template in terms of how it can be done. But I think it's going to be the call of the dean and the other administrators in terms of sino ang assign. Sa SAS, meron man silang mga full part-time faculty. In fact, ang ginamit nila kay yung ibang part-time nila parang mas madali matuto ng ano. So that yung mga senior faculty or ibang full-time faculty are the ones just providing the content and then parang helping out in terms of converting that is being done by the other part-time faculty. Pero this arrangement, I think, could be done within the level of the school. So I'm not prescribing anything for it kasi I think parang the deans and the assistant deans and the chairs would be in a better position to assess parang what would be best in this situation. Ito po, Don, parang this has been raised before. We do have a precedent in terms of the course pack that we were developing before. I've talked with it with NICE. Mukhang okay naman sa kanya, but I still have to talk to the other admins about it. But I think parang kung naman, personally, parang I think it's fair that we're able to provide some sort of compensation for it as well. But this is not yet the final word on it, no. But I'm certainly, I've raised it already with the President's Council that we will have to discuss incentive schemes and compensation schemes, no. I've applied for a grant sa United Board. Hopefully ma-approve yun kasi ang isang inisip ko noon is yun nga parang to provide incentives for course developers. No? Pero we're working on it. I can't say yet definitively kung anong ano nun. But the other higher admins are already aware of it, and it's in one of my agenda as well that we will have to cover. So copyright concerns, copyright intellectual property concerns, incentives, compensation schemes. I've considered that, and I'm working on it as well.
Father, another question po.
Sige po.
Margie po.
Sino po?
Margie.
Ay, Margie. Hi, Margie.
Okay. Father, with respect to the evaluation or giving of summative test, This is in the context of the accountancy department because we usually give departmental exam. So, isang schedule lang po yan. Tapos, isang exam for all the sections po. So, when we develop our courseware for the accountancy courses po, kailangan ba na after the student is able to finish the course, dapat ibigay na yung evaluation agad? Or is it possible na schedule pa rin yung departmental exam?
Now, my take on that is, what would you prefer? At least for that final summative na ano.
Mas better po yung one time po para isang standardized exam.
Then we could put that in as something na it will only be activated after a certain time. So at least that will also help students na kailangan mag-prepare na ako before this time kasi at this time ito na talaga yung ano. So sa akin okay yun. I mean parang I'm taking into account parang what would be siguro from your estimation parang what would be best siguro in terms of that practice. I think we could be flexible with that.
Okay, thank you, Father.
And yun pala March, no? So everything we're doing now, let's put in other words what we want to see, because how we're doing it now in the ABP office is that ngayon parang we're still operating on what was released. Pero much of what comes out of this courseware development process will be things that we will support with policy. Okay, so it's a chance to actually define parang the policy that will be supportive of our courseware and our teaching.
Thank you po, Father.
Father, I don't know kung correct me if I'm sa mga accountancy teachers kasi po syempre pag when we say accountancy, ang focus talaga nila is the board exam. Mao gyud na ilaha. Wa gyud tay mabuhat ana kay ang ilahang ambition is to become CPAs.
Yes.
My question is ang problema is mo na ilang focus. Now, ang nagiging kwan is ang students mismo ang nagasulti na we need your lecture. Kay hindi kasabot kung if we just read ganyan. So what's your stand on this, Father? Kanang all subjects ba talaga are required to be kailangan na adjust courseware?
Okay. Yes, kasi yung courseware really is parang our platform in terms of how it could be designed, no? But we could halimbawa in that case, no, first I don't know, parang yung first is parang bukang mahirap kung ganun sinasabi nila, mahirap na for something to be explained beforehand and recorded and for them to follow, that they would need really an actual lecture to be able to learn about it. Siguro the way to do about it is still following the same framework, but instead of the more asynchronous na activities, you could put in there parang the synchronous activity. The only disadvantage for that is for the teachers, no, good, no, instead of parang really parang recording it beforehand and teaching it really in such a way na kasi basically if you're going to teach it synchronously and if you're going to record what you're going to teach beforehand, it's just the same thing, no? The only thing siguro is if they have questions, but in the courseware you could put in, no, we could put in things there wherein students can, for example, provide feedback if they want to, no? What I do in my classes is I record it beforehand, no? And yun nga, parang if they have questions, I answer na lang through chat. Pero hindi na ako yung nag-lecture talaga before, nag-lecture ng real time, no? So they're thinking I'm giving a lecture in real time, but actually, hindi. Parang it's all recorded beforehand. So nag-respond na lang ako sa tanong nila through chat or ano. So I think kailangan we need to ano siguro, Joe, parang gather more feedback siguro from the teachers themselves, no, in terms of parang what solutions can we find, kasi ang tingin ko niyan parang magiging burden for the teachers kasi you will always have to be there all the time, no, and at the same time parang in terms of the students, yung need nila for lecture, no, you can actually fill that in by, kasi it's the same lecture that you will be doing eh. Siguro ang kailangan lang nila that personal contact or assurance, which could still be factored in sa courseware, no? So that after the lecture you've delivered, yung time is for questions that emerge from the lectures that you've already delivered for. Pero dili nakamahago. Kaya na, kumbaga, you try to explain, but you've just produced it ahead of time. So that parang another component in the module is just the time when the questions that I have, yung mga hindi clear, that's what you can supplement. So you don't have to be there parang every meeting, but you could set aside a time na parang ano na rin, parang tulungan na rin sila na at this point, parang if there are things na hindi klaro, this is a time when I'd be explaining more about this, no? So, pwede mapasok yun kasi we can get that feedback beforehand so that you would know if you're going to conduct a synchronous lecture, kung ano yung, or synchronous session, kung ano na lang yung i-focus mo in support of what you've already given beforehand.
So, parang so you're suggesting, Father, na i-record na lang nila ilang lecture?
Okay. Actually, mahago kay ganun man din pag mag-lecture ka real time, di ba? Ganun din.
Mura siya matinik ka ng mga ingana nga video.
Tapos kung dili nila masabtan, get the feedback from that. You can put that in the courseware. And then kung kailangan, then ibutang nato dung time na yon na, sige, at least once a week, meron kang pandagdag supplement doon sa mga hindi naintindihan doon. But you can't, parang we have to train our students not to be over-reliant on lecture. Kasi otherwise, ano siya, parang hindi natin sila maturuan na to learn how to learn eh. Pero yung expertise mo is still being taught because you're still the one delivering the lecture. Pero dili nakamahago every week na every time mag-prepare ka pirmi. Kay gihimo na nimo beforehand. Ulat na lang ka nga, sige, unsay pangutana diri. Ay, silin ka.
Mag-artista na mi ani.
Yes.
Ingana,
Sir Joff.
Ay, continue please, sorry.
Yes, Father Cleo.
Ay, Cleo.
Cleo po. Sir Joff, mo man mo ginabuhat sa accountancy. So, pre-recorded na mo PowerPoint the lecture and then need lang jud na mo at least once a week na mag-synchronous discussion kay very difficult na katuganing even the exercises i-pre-record na mo. Mas makarelate mo gud ang mga students if synchronous discussion na mag-solve ang problem. So the theories and some illustrative problems gina-record na mo prior mo tamo ginasend sa ila, pero katulagi nag-deviate yun mi sa mandate ni Ma'am Gina na as much as possible wala
Nawala po siya.
Mga problem sa synchronous lecture kay mawala ka. Ayan na si Clear.
Nag-synchronous discussion should me Sir Joff kay dili yun kaya na dili mag-synchronous discussion.
Wala lagi. Mawala gyud.
Pwede man gud nimo sila sa assign problems na to different groups para sila gani ang mag-report kasi by them reporting makuha pod nimo na ay nakuha nila ang imong padala na lecture tapos dito na lang sila nag-raise of clarifications. Gina-encourage lang namo na it's okay na what you present to us is not it answer, at least when nasa mo na ay difficulty or at least ma-affirm po na mo if the answers that you have presented is tama or dili.
Ayos kayo.
in the technology that we have, you can actually put that in, for example, yung that students will just give you back yung so that you can always assess yung how they're tackling cases, no, at the same time, without parang having to be there parang all the time for it. So but I think we'll start muna with where you are. That's why yung mga instructional designers, si Lynn is here, parang to assist us in parang finding ways of parang making it easier for teachers as well. We don't want to deprive students, of course, of their learning, pero maybe there are more strategic ways to be able to help our students better. But if you assess na parang this is really needed, parang we can always put that in pa rin sa courseware. But at least na parang mas spaced out and mas parang you won't be burdened that much with having to always teach all the time in your online classes.
Father, I want to share something with respect to what Cleo shared.
Sure.
Ano siguro, Father, we also need to prepare our students to this kind of environment. Kasi feeling ko, ang feeling nila parang mura sila gipasagdan pag walay kanang synchronous na session with the teacher. So we also need to prepare them and reorient them on this kind of learning environment.
Yes, that's right, March. Kaya we're still clarifying muna it with the teachers. Kasi once we're all on the same page, then that's the time that we could also share it with the students, no? So that parang we're all we know what to expect and we know what to prepare for. But certainly parang yun siguro yung isang naging difficulty din natin when we shifted. We tried to prepare the teachers but basically did not prepare the students, no? Pero that's one thing talaga that's very important, as you mentioned, no? To orient them as well in terms of parang what it means to be able to learn online, parang given the courseware that we're developing.
Hi, Father.
Hi, hello, sino po?
Si Neil po ito. May question lang ako, Father.
Okay. Hello, Neil.
Pahabol lang. Curious lang ako ba, like for example, sa statistics na subject and magawa tayo ng courseware. Now, marami kasi nagtuturo niyan. So, ano ang setup natin sa paggawa ng courseware? Like, kunin natin lahat yung nagtuturo, yung full-time and part-time, or may iselect lang tayo na team para maggawa niyan. So, ang issue kasi diyan pag like for example, maliit lang gumawa ng courseware, hindi involve yung lahat. Ano yung ano ang gagamitin ng hindi involve? Yun pa rin? Yun pa rin parang uniform siya? Or baka kasi later on, pag nagawa na yung courseware and hindi mag-agree yung iba na dili man ako ina na magtudlo or unsa, like how do we deal with that kind of problem? Okay, thank you, Father.
Okay, thank you, Neil. That's a very relevant question as well. Dito sa SAS kasi, yung example niyan is the GE courses that they're teaching. Many faculty are teaching the same GE course, no? And what we've done is basically to involve all the faculty as part of the course development team, no? Murag karon ang gihimo nila, for example sa Philo, ang tanang magtutudlo nag-assign sila og content nga mautong iyang i-lecture, no? So may recorded video sila of that professor teaching a particular content. So nagsabot sila in terms of unsa tong atong ibutang diri, kinsa mag-lecture ani, unsay materials, and then they place it together, and that's why by October 26 mahuman daw nila ang ilang courseware. So I don't know if that answers this question, but it would be good to involve everyone who's really teaching it at the moment, no? Because what will happen is that once the base courseware is complete, all those who will be coming in to start teaching will have to use that base courseware para nasa standard siya in terms of, parang for that course, in an online environment, morning standard na to because it's something that has been peer reviewed and peer vetted, no, by the faculty who are really teaching that subject. So
Okay.
lang anak kay ang pag-facilitate kay syempre naiuban nga mas nindot man ako ganino, but I think to go through that process no. Kasi sayang if we don't harness parang the great resource that we have, which is really the subject matter experts who know about this, no.
Okay. Thank you, Father.
You're welcome. Thank you, Pud. Napa po yung pangutana. Would it be okay if ipakita ko lang ulit if some of you have not seen it yet, just a sample, sample lang to. Ito yung dun po sa Diagler. Okay. This is the module which you can find in Site Home, and then you go to course categories, and then you go to online education. There are many courses here to help parang introduce you to what it means to teach online. But there's this course here on Courseware, which is something that I use just to demonstrate the practical, concrete aspects of what Courseware feels like. No? So here is a sample of it, parang arranged and using the components. So you have an overview, for example. Here I am parang giving an overview of the module, and then the learning outcomes, something like this. If you click it, then students will read what it is all about. And then you have the learning activities. So you have, for example, a reading materials, and then you can have, for example, the lesson. In this case, ayan siya. So sample of a lesson. And then you have here the activity, parang if you want to conduct a synchronous session. So in this case, big blue button ang gigamit, but this could either be a Zoom link or a Google Meet link as well. So here you have the forum if you want to make some assessments, no? Or formative assessments, pwede nandyan. Yung sabi natin na reflection kanina, it's really as simple as this, no? A question which tells them, before moving on to the next activity, please take a moment to reflect on your learning and identify how well you think you have understood the content on topic, and then whether you've been able to accomplish the learning outcomes for this section. So ganun lang kasimple. Ito yung kanyang simple na implementation. Tapos yung further resources, nandito po ang link. Yung evaluation is just a feedback tool where if they answer the questions, so parang ganyan, how would you rate your learning in this section? And then which part of the lesson did you find difficult to understand? Which part of the lesson did you find easy to understand? What else would you have wanted to learn from this session? So something as simple as that, no? In as components of the courseware. Now, I made parang another module here, which is, kumbaga, parang exploring the possibilities of courseware. So taking into account parang all the elements that I mentioned, so it will be something like this. You have there parang a recommended pace. You have here a video which is interactive, no? Halimbawa, if you see here,
welcome to this module. In this module,
it's
we
me.
will try to
Then I can
explore,
click here. So I could put in, for example, a question or
hopefully the things that
and
you
then
will
at
see
the end
here
of the video,
will inspire you and help
you have
in building up your
a
ICT
summary
course.
or formative assessment, and then you can ask, what is this module, Paul? Kunyari, wala dyan ko naminaw, i-click ko, so mali. And then once I get the right answer, and then I can continue. No? So, ayan, and then I can submit my answers to that video that I presented. No? So if I go to the next part, yung learning outcomes, something similar to what I did. No? So kaya siya interactive content kasi mag-click-click. Pag maraming click-click sa content, then parang that increases yung interactivity of a content. So the next part, you can have a part where, in this case, if I want my students to introduce, or I could have them record themselves. Kunyari, hello, I'm OG, blah, blah, blah. Welcome. I'm happy to be in this course. And then once I'm done, click on it. I can listen first to what I've recorded. Blah, blah, blah. Welcome. I'm happy to be in this course. And then once I'm done, I can download it. So if I download it, I can submit it in the next section to my teacher, no? Halimbawa dun sa assignment activity, dito ko i-submit yung ginawa kong yung audio, no? Or it could be a video for that matter, no? And then I'll have a sample activity. In this case, I can link a website, no? The website of the vision and mission of the Ateneo de Davao. Supposing ito yung lesson ko. And then once students can do that, so as you can see, it's also interactive because it already links the website within the page, no? Unlike yung ibang implementation na pupunta ka pa doon sa kamo i-navigate, no? So that means parang it's all focused still within the courseware. And then once I'm done, what I can do is I could take, for example, a formative assessment, no? Wherein I could use the chat interface in order to discuss, for example, the vision mission. No? So I could put in here, parang comments, interact with my classmates, no? And then once I'm done with that, I could take another formative assessment, no, to review it, no. So in this case, ginamit ko yung isang format wherein para naman mas exciting, parang click and drag. So I click and drag the items here, no, para matulungan ako mag-review nung natutunan ko, no. So you can use that also in your implementation, no, na para hindi lang yung typical multiple choice answers, but you could use something like this, and then the students could immediately assess as a form of formative assessment, no. He can retry or he could try to look at the solution, no. So again, alam niya na kaagad, so he can try again if he wants, no? And then next part is yung the reflection part. So ito iniba ko, ginamitan ko halimbawa nitong module na to, no. So I could say the reflection could be something like this. Looking back at the learning outcomes for this module, what were you supposed to learn here? So let's say, sabihin ko, exploring Moodle. Then I check. Ayan, meron nakalagay dyan na correct answer. Pero siya, pwede din siya na walang ano. So sabihin ko lang, sample. Pwede din siya na hindi siya magkaroon ng right or wrong answer, no? Pero dito kasi nilagyan ko ng right and wrong answer, no? In this case. And then what I can do is look at what I've answered, no? Or submit it to the professor. So, and then after that, I could test my understanding by taking another quiz, for example, no? So in this case, parang a typical multiple choice question. So let's say I know the answer to this and I check. Okay, tama. Okay. And then I can proceed to the next part, no? And then here you have the evaluation wherein, katulad yung kanina, a simple implementation, ito, parang it's more user-friendly, I guess. No? And then I could put in here my suggestions, or at least based on the questions that were asked pagdating sa evaluation. Then once it's done, okay, I can submit it so that the teacher will be aware of my own experience, no? And then, ayun. So, and then if I have further resources, I have here a page that links me to materials that I can learn further, or videos so that I could supplement my learning. So, yun po yung parang example of courseware that we could build, no? So we could harness it to make it more interactive for our students. So, and all the tools here are actually in Moodle already. So yun po yung a short demo lang. Okay. Wala na pong question. I think if there are no more questions, I think ang next step natin is just to talk about the tools that we will use in order to manage the process, and then after that to use the tools that we need in order to build the content. Yun po yung mga succeeding natin na sessions. But I will just await yung the schedules that will be given back to me by Dean Jenner or sila Sir Joff or Ma'am Margie. So yun lang po. Unless there are other questions, parang that's all I have to share for this morning.
Okay na, Father.
I guess, Father, wala na sigurong questions. So mga kailan po pwedeng sunod na session, Father? Nasa pwede?
Pwede tayo next week din kung ano.
Pangutanon sa namo si Sir Jenner.
Sige po, pagkuan na lang.
We will just-
Taga-ira kog times nga kwan. Taga-ira kog times kung kano sa nga kwan. Pero okay lang po for everyone yung ating courseware, yung at least what it promises to deliver and what we're supposed to do. At least for now, parang a general overview lang po.
Yes, Father. Very nice.
So we can upgrade so that we could be more we could teach better, and also we will feel a greater sense of satisfaction na kahit na online teaching we will feel better about what we're doing. Sige po. So with that, kung okay na po sa tanan, with your permission, maybe we could we'll just end this meeting. So thank you very much once again for your patience and your time, and thank you. Hopefully makaya natin tong lahat. So adya lang padayon lang tantanan. So Sir Joff, Sir Marge, okay na? Okay na tayo?
Okay naman siguro, Father. Maniud to na ta.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Father.
Salamat po.
Sige, Father. Salamat kayo. Salamat.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
you.
listening. Thank you.
Okay,
Father,
salamat.
bye-bye.
Din, ito yung mga gagawin mo yung ganung klase.
Ay, naku. Sige po, kaya.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye po.
Father, basig kinanglan ni Dean Jenner yung recorded mo
Ay, ako pala.
Ipan na
Mag-send
kasi
ko lang. I-upload na ako sa YouTube and then isend na ako ang link. Bugat mo guni.
Basta ako Zoom.
Isend mo sa email, Father.
Opo.
Sige ha, share. Thank
Ito na lang.
you.
Sige, Father. Thank you. Salamat kayo.
Salamat po. Thank you.